First we'll load an agent, and then we can load some actions. In this case we're going to load some AMCs. They will come in from the same load actions dialog. We can click on one, or we can shift drag over several. Now if we go to the action editor, we should see these actions, and we can hit solo and then the spacebar. Well, now he's run off screen, but if we go Alt F, we'll see where he's gone to. Let's look at the walk action. As you can see, there's a bit more than just a walk in there. So we're going to have to trim this down. In fact, we're going to loop it. But first, we need to make sure that he's travelling down world Z. I just went Shift Alt A to switch on the viewing of the world axis. Which is there. Shift Alt A. Okay, and you can see the yellow one is the Z one. He's certainly not moving along that. So let's go to the Transform tab, and we can rotate him around until he's travelling down the axis. There, that's better. Okay, now let's go into Curves and select some curves as a reference for our looping. And then we go into Loop, and we can drag the start and the end to sort of roughly where we think there might be a loop. Now it's a bit hard to tell if we do have a loop because the camera is following him, but it sort of takes a little while to get back to the start. So let's switch off the filtering on the camera by going Shift Alt F. Now we've got a better idea of what sort of loop we've got here. And we can get a closer look at the curves by going right drag on the bar at the bottom here to zoom in. Right, okay, it's pretty clear that we've got the end a little too late compared to the beginning. Let's just bring that in a little. And that looks a lot better. Now, we can also crossfade between the start and the end. So even if it is a little bit out, and let's make it a little bit out just for the sake of this demonstration, then we can introduce a little bit of crossfade by putting a number into the crossfade box. And now we can drag those points around. They can go after or before the start and end. And you should see that now we get a very smooth loop. So even if your start and end aren't right, or they don't match up properly, you can get a smooth loop with crossfade looping. Now one thing that we haven't done yet is we haven't selected what kind of action this is. We can categorize actions into static, turning, locomotion or ramp. A static action is where he's basically standing on the spot. A turning action is where there is an overall turn to the action. A locomotion is a walk or a run or a trot. And a ramp is an uphill or downhill motion. In this case, this is a locomotion. And that will determine which of the route curves get crossfade looping applied, but we don't need to worry about that too much at this stage. Okay, well, at this point it's looking like a good loop, so we'll accept that by hitting the Apply button. And now we have our action looped. But if we were to switch off Follow, we would see that this is still not very useful as an action because it doesn't get the agent to traverse around the scene. It's just repeating over and over in one place. What we need is for the agent to have what's called agent curves, which are velocities rather than absolute positions in space. So they enable the agent to move relative to its current position instead of to an absolute position. And we can get those by clicking on Agent. Now we already have here a preview of the results of creating the agent curves so that we can play with the parameters and get the results that we want before we hit Apply, in much the same way as the Loop tab gives us a preview while we're playing with those parameters. Again, we've got the buttons to determine what kind of action it is, and locomotion is still selected. These buttons here actually affect several settings, which we can see if we click on this little plus here. This little matrix of buttons, which we don't really have to understand at this point as long as we've got the right action category selected. But there is a little slider down here called filter width, and that is just the amount of filtering that's applied to the agent curves, so that they don't slavishly follow along with the root node, but they actually give us a slightly smoother overall progression of the agent through the scene. Now, that's not essential, and it can occasionally cause a little bit of weirdness, so sometimes you might want to switch it off just by dragging it down to 0 if there is any weirdness going on there, but usually it's fine and it just gives slightly nicer results in the transitions. So we'll leave it as it is. And in fact, we're quite happy with the agent curves that we have now from the look of what's happening with this agent space, so we'll just hit apply. So now we have an agent who can just traverse along through the scene with his walk action.